Welcome to all of you. Thank you for spending time with us. So I wanted to introduce the topic of this lunch symposium. It is called Advocating for Youth, SRHR, and Access to Family Planning, Reports from Bali and the Road to the SDGs. So this morning you already heard from many of the plenary speakers about the Sustainable Development Goals. But one thing that happened very recently in Asia Pacific was also a big conference, global conference on family planning called the International Conference on Family Planning. And it just happened at the end of January of this year. So we are very excited about reporting on some of the results from the Bali conference and how we can continue to carry forward the advocacy agenda from here into the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Can everybody hear us? Yeah? So I wanted to also introduce my co-chair, and that's Dr. Nathan. We will be co-facilitating this discussion. The idea of the lunch symposium is based on this phrase that you've heard, which is think globally and act locally. As SRHR advocates, we are always keeping an eye on what is happening at the global level in our movement, and then linking it to local realities, so that we can continue to reflect the challenges we have at the grassroots to policymakers who are sitting in the capital cities. So today we have four very distinguished speakers. The first speaker is Ms. Tamara Greenan. She is the Director of Population and Urban Health at the Lucile Packard Foundation. And the foundation is one of the business supporters of this conference and this symposium. So she's also an expert on comprehensive sexuality education. Then next we'll have Ms. Wynne Ronash, who is the Associate Program Officer of Family Planning at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She will talk to you about the FP 2020 movement and how that is causing much excitement around the world in SRHR. You have already also heard a little bit in the plenary session about Myanmar's commitment to it. And then we will turn to Siva Anantira. She is the Executive Director of ARROW. And Siva is a very well-known advocate globally and will guide us through some of the struggles that were made by global SRHR advocates. Yet the SRHR issues reflected in the SDG process. And then finally we have Dr. Candice Du from Pathfinder International, and she will talk about the global consensus statement on long-acting contraceptive methods that has implications for the delivery of youth-friendly SRHR services. So I'm very happy to see many of you here with the youth advocates. So I hope this will serve as a useful background for you to do some of your local advocacy back home. So tomorrow, please go ahead.
So first of all, whole family, etc. We want to be sure that there's family planning and contraception in the context of good reproductive health. And we want to make sure that that's followed up by access to abortion services. So when we think about sexual and reproductive health and rights, we like to think about that continuum of information. That's number one. Number two, I think as we move forward and think about these issues, we have to make sure that our framing is positive. So we're talking about young people. We're talking about recipients of services. We're talking about advocates. And we like to think of them as assets, as contributors, as movement builders, as part of figuring out the solution and the way forward. Not in any way as liability. I see that hand at the back. Does that mean you can't hear me? All right, we'll keep working on this mic by the time we get to the hand that we can work well. So those are two ways that I think it's important to frame this conversation. Now, as we think about information services, and we think about sexual and reproductive health and rights for young people, I think an important starting place is comprehensive sexuality education. And when I say that, I mean sexuality education is based on a lot of evidence. A lot of what we know matters and makes a difference. So it includes the gender factors. It includes addressing issues of violence. And it includes, in some instances, we're learning more and more important overlay of mental health and resilience. Now, what does that really mean? It means helping young people set goals. It means thinking about self-esteem. It means addressing issues of stress and fears that are challenging in life and trauma at home. Because we know all of those issues can impact how a young person can be and what choices they make around sexuality. It also means addressing the positive. So something that's happened in sexuality education is all come about the bad things that we want to avoid. It's come about HIV and of course we want to avoid that, and STD and teenage pregnancy. But in fact, sexuality seems very positive. It's also about pleasure and about important parts of life and relationships. And has a very tender side. And we want to make sure that that is part of the conversation. We know when we think about sexuality education that there's a lot of fears. People say, well, parents don't really want to talk to their kids about sex. Because if you talk about sex, then it's much more likely that young people are going to have sex. But what we know from all the research is that good sexuality education actually helps young people make better choices and delay sexuality. And we also know from a lot of studies that parents actually want good sexuality education. They actually want somebody helping them fundamental human rights. And two, if we don't go down the path of quality, we will really stigmatize service. So for example, contraceptive services. We don't provide quality contraceptive services. Women and young people will simply wander away. They won't come tell us they didn't like that, or that they didn't get enough information, or the counseling wasn't good, or they weren't offered options or treated with respect. They'll simply wander away. And we won't meet the number of unmet needs that we hope to meet. The same is true for success. Who wants to go have a conversation where you're not respected? So we think quality is critical for those two reasons. We also think that we have to have one gold standard of quality. It's not okay to say, well, in the city there's one standard because we have more resources, and in the rural areas there's another. We aspire to one standard. We know it's not going to be easy, and we want to work together to work our way towards that standard and to be ambitious. So the question I think that's important to ask is, what does quality mean for each of you? What would you like when you go get services? And think about that as you advocate. Take those messages to policymakers and service providers and demand the kind of quality that you want for everyone. And then finally, advocate and advocate all the time. So think about what your goals are. Think about who you're targeting. And as you think about that, think about what motivates them, their life experience, and how can you support them. Think about policies. Think about how they're being implemented, and look at the budget. And as you do all of this, my suggestion is to think about the heart and think about the head. So take a few good numbers and some important stories and start to make those change. I think the SDGs are going to be useful. We all have to be vigilant that the indicators are the indicators we want. We can't turn our backs because we could end up with indicators we don't like. And ultimately, SDGs don't require. So follow those SDGs to the finish and keep your voices loud. And as you advocate on all of these things, listen carefully, be bold, and be ambitious. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pathfinder. And now, I'd like to invite Ms. Winslow to the podium just Can you hear me? Raise your hand in the back if you can hear me. Try this again. All right. I think we're going to stick to this. I'm worried that a little too confused. We'll be right back. Okay, how about now? So thank you, everyone, for spending your lunch with us, and I'd like to thank Summer for inviting me to be a part of this panel with so many colleagues who I have such great respect for. I was asked to speak a little bit about FP 2020, and so I'm going to speak both from the lens of FP 2020, but also through the lens of the Gates Foundation. So in 2012, the Gates Foundation, along with 20 other commitment makers, started a movement that we like to call FP 2020 with the goal of reaching 120 million additional women and girls by the year 2020. The vision was that every woman and girl, regardless of where you are from, should have access to the same life-saving contraceptive services. Since then, a number of countries in the Asia-Pacific
adolescence is a priority. And we believe that we need to invest not just in research and development on new technologies, but also to develop and generating evidence on early intervention and, probably most importantly, on improving service delivery. We intend to partner with donors, governments, and civil society partners, and with all of the people in this room to make that happen. We're going to invest in the learning agenda, and we're going to focus on human-centered design and putting adolescents at the center of all of our work to ensure that we have better outcomes. I'd like to add on to tomorrow's list of things that we think about as we go home, and one of those things is to encourage you to engage with your FP 2020 groups locally, to get involved in developing the country action plans with your government officials, and to ensure that youth really does remain at the center of the priorities for your country.
So I've always thought that, post-lunch dialogue is always the hardest because people are full, but I guess during lunch dialogue is way far harder because you're competing with so many different things happening in the room. So it gives me great pleasure anyway to be able to address some of the issues that sort of had brought up, which is young people in the SDG. And of course, as most of us know, in Myanmar, young people actually constitute the majority of the population. And when we talk about young people, we try to have a comprehensive approach to young people. And this conference is largely about sexual and reproductive health and rights. I think that a comprehensive rights-based approach to young people also means enabling young people from all environmental and income levels, all different income levels, to have access to important things that matter to them, such as quality education, employment opportunities, and opportunities to develop your lives in the way that you most wish to develop your lives in. And it is also important to be able for young people to lead a life free from violence, whether it is with regard to sexual orientation and gender identity, or ethnicity, or immigrant status, political beliefs. And within this, of course, in this larger spectrum of rights, you have the smaller spectrum which we often talk about in the context of SRHR, which are sexual and reproductive rights. And I would like to remind that these are actually very fundamental, basic rights of every human being. This is the right to choose who you love, who you marry, when you marry, how many children do you want to have, if you even want to have children in the first place. So, is it actually possible for us to enjoy our lives without having the fundamental rights over our body? Because what happens with our body determines what happens in our lives. And I know that very often in countries like Myanmar, because I come from Malaysia, that young people often have to give a deference to the older generation. And we do this because out of respect, because our culture tells us this, or because our religious beliefs teach us this. But just because we give deference to the older generation does not mean young people do not have these rights. We give this deference in spite of that, right? So we must always understand that even when we respect our elders, that we still possess these fundamental rights. Second thing I wanted to talk about was maybe some of the ways that we talk about young people need to change, especially when we come from an Asian background. Very often, young people are seen as a group which are pleasure-seeking. They do not know responsibility. They do not have responsibility. So this is one way of framing young people, right? The second way of framing young people is, of course, looking at them as victims of either abuse, of trafficking, of vulnerabilities and oppressions.
But there is also a third way of looking at young people, and this is my own experience with all the young people that I work with, right? Is that young people essentially in their hearts are so idealistic. This is the group that is asking for equality. This is the group that fights for rights. This is the group that is asking for justice in our society. And they actually believe they can and they want to create a better world. And it's no small feat when you look at, how democratic revolutions have come about in the last 5 years or so. It is a largely young population, such as that was in Egypt, and that is in Myanmar, which will actually bring about this democratic transition, hoping to create an institution, a society, hold the government more accountable, and create a country which is actually having some of these principles of equality, rights, and justice at its heart. And I know that so I think it is very important that when we talk about young people, that we need to recognize that they have this passionate pursuit of justice enshrined in their heart. And this is something that we should never lose sight when we are doing our work with young people. The last thing I know, because I've talked about sexual and reproductive rights, then I've talked about human rights, and of course as an Asian person, one of the things that the conversations and the debates that take place in our community is, are human rights compatible with our Asian culture, right? And this is whether we are advocating to the government, whether we are talking to service providers, is going to be a question that people will keep asking. And it's very simple when we talk about sexual and reproductive rights and we talk about human rights. Very often, many of the people we're trying to advocate to will tell us, but that is a Western agenda, that is a liberal agenda, that is a foreign agenda, that is not inherent in our own society. But let me just tell you, as somebody who is born a Hindu and I live in a multiracial society and a Muslim majority country, one of the things that when I was reading, there are many good things, positive things about our culture, but at the same time, there are things that need to be changed. There are things that need to be reformed. For example, in the culture that I was born in, girls are always regarded inferior to sons, right? And this is whether in eating practice, that boys are fed first before girls are, or whether, who gets, if there is one good school that your parents could pay for, it was the son who got that type of education. I was a little bit more fortunate because my father only had one child, that was me. But this is what I had to face with my cousins and I had to face. So when we went to the temple, we were always considered inferior. We could not participate in the rituals. So in many of these things, we have changed, right? And what enabled us to change? It is these concepts of equality, these concepts of human rights, that you as a girl in a society when you're growing up, you are an equal human being to everyone else. You are deserving of respect. You are deserving of investment. You are deserving of attention. And this is a good concept. It is a good concept where, regardless of wherever it comes from, and it can make a difference in our lives and how we construct our societies in the future. The second thing I wanted to say is, another thing that really moved me is when I was working, and I had a friend of mine, right, and we were working in a magazine. My friend was gay, and he would always say, I know it's wrong, and I'm trying to change, but at that time he was actually being reformed by a religious group in order to change from a gay person to a straight person. In about 2 years, what happened to him was he committed suicide. So till today, I still think, if we lived in a different sort of culture, would he still be alive today? And I think that this is what we are all trying to do. So we're not only creating a more equal and a more just society by using rights mechanisms, but we are also trying to create a kind of world for everyone. So that's all I want to say.
Can you hear me? I can hear myself. Thank you and welcome to everyone. I hope you've had a nice lunch and hope I don't put you to sleep after your nice lunch. But what I'd like to take a few minutes to do is to talk about what's next. So if we've had a wonderful conference so far with adolescents and empowering adolescents. We've talked about the rights of adolescents. In fact, the word rights has come up many, many times. Not too many, but probably not enough. But my question is, once we get to that point and we all accept that, what next? So for the adolescents in the group, and I know there are a few, if you have your right to choose not to have a child and you go to the nearest clinic, how many of you will know which should be offered to you? Should they offer all the methods to you, or should they just offer the ones they think you should have, and they meaning the providers? And of course your answer should be they should offer me all of the methods that are available because it is my right to choose that. So what I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about is a consensus statement that we have put together to take a stand globally about the adolescents' rights and go the next step. Rights to what? And we're talking about what type of contraception. So many of you know that there are condoms, there are oral contraceptives, there are injectable shots, but some of the most effective methods of birth control that many think should not be used by young people are longer acting contraceptives, such as the intrauterine device and contraceptive implants. And so what we're finding in many places that people will see adolescents, they will talk a little bit to them about sexuality, they will be a little bit more comfortable with that, but when they get down to offering them the methods that they think are appropriate for the adolescent or young person, they will leave out some of the better methods that are available. And so what we're trying to do is make a strong statement that this should not be so, that adolescents should deserve the full method of, full range of methods, including longer active and effective methods of contraception. What the statement says is that these methods are safe, that they're very effective, and if we can dispel some of the myths that are around these types of contraception, it would be more acceptable to the adolescents and to the communities around them. And in certain places around the world, we have found that when adolescents are offered these types of contraception, they accept them and they're very happy with them. So this is the next step. We have the right to decide. You have the right to decide, but you need to know what you should have the right to decide at. So this global consensus statement for expanding contraceptive choice for adolescents and youth to include long-acting reversible contraception is the consensus statement that I've talked about, and it is actually housed on the AP 2020 website. Briefly, it says three things. That we believe that providing access to the widest available contraceptive options, including long-acting reversible contraceptives, which mean IVs and implants, should be available to all sexually active adolescents and youth, regardless of marital status and how many children they've had or if they've had children at all. Number two, we believe that ensuring that these contraceptives are offered and available should be among the essential contraceptive options. In other words, not the second choice, but up there among the first choices, and that this should be included in any type of contraceptive education and any counseling and services. And number three, the last, that we need to provide evidence and information to our policymakers, our ministry representatives, our program managers, our providers, our communities and family members, and adolescents and youth on the safety, the effectiveness, reversibility, and acceptability of these methods. And if you were to, so far we've had 45 donors, NGOs, and other supporters sign this consensus statement, and it is just the next step forward as to realizing the rights of adolescents. Thank you.
symposium. It's open to us both Burmese and English. I'm happy to translate and yeah.
This is Harita. I'm academic for Pathfinder International in Bangladesh. Thank you for beautiful presentations from all your sides. I think countries like ours, what we face is the how to. We know what to. You know, the respect, the choice, their rights and all of those things. But when we think of the country perspective, in countries, the gatekeepers, I think that's where we struggle a lot. And we have to do more, how we overcome those barriers and reach out adolescents to give those information, to give them their rights, how we take to them, how we ensure that these are happening. I think that's where we have to put in more resources, more research, more understanding, and that's how we will gain more. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to hear some how to. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Harris.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Haris, Aman Health Sukh Initiative. I have a question for Tamara and Sonu. I just like to know when someone said about comprehensive approach for young people. You meant education, you meant livelihood, you meant SRHR. So how can we use such forums to advocate for that comprehensiveness by inviting different departments that are directly related to the young people? So being the co-host also, how does Gates and Pathfinder as co-host, how you feel it's important to use such forums for that advocacy also?
I think most of all we have to put young people and their voices at the center of advocacy. We have to make sure we spend a lot of time listening to them and ensuring that their voices are front and center. And at the same time, we have to figure out what the barriers are. So if it's a school system, if it's parents, we have to understand where they're coming from and show through research, through polling, and through focus groups what they actually want for young people. And I think if you start an open dialogue, you begin to see that people do want comprehensive sexuality education. Interestingly enough, in some places where it's begun, over time school systems and school staff start to see the difference in their young people. That they're attending school more, they're doing a better job, and that makes them more interested in providing comprehensive sexuality education. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. We all have to raise our voices, and we all have to be advocates on behalf of and with young people.
Thank you.
My name is Aumir. I used to say I'm a civil society activist because I belong to no organization, no religion, no race. And for your SRHR, I was invited last year at the National Health Forum, my Health Forum. So I've been studying almost about a year of that subject. Actually, I am interested in that subject since 70s, before I get married. So I have 4 points to stress. Because I believe SRHR is very important, not only for the woman, not only for the youth, but for everyone. Without SR, sexuality and reproduction, there will be no living thing. The world will be zero. So I believe SRHR is beyond anybody, youth, women, children. So my first point, as I realized, there is a very, let's say, important movement. I believe almost all of you have heard of World Humanitarian Summit in Turkey, Istanbul, May this year. Will APSC, this conference, will give a strong message to that World Humanitarian Summit? Because I believe APCRSHR is very humanitarian. And another thing, if this conference is going to convey the message to World Humanitarian Summit about the importance of APCRSHR, I suggest we better concentrate on education, namely comprehensive sexuality education. My definition of comprehensive may not be the same as many. I didn't mean to know everything about sex or reproduction. I mean to include every aspect of life as morality, ethics, and so on. And the fourth one, as I told you, APCRSHR is a privilege as high priority in that World Humanitarian Summit. So, the last thing I want to address is, I have heard many people address youth, seeing them as victims or idealists or many sorts. But nobody sees the youth as going to be parents soon. For APCRSHR is the most important view I suggest, to see the youth as the becoming parent, soon becoming parent. So, to include that comprehensive sexuality education, it is very important to use the youth to develop curriculum and train them as the parents so that they will train their kids and they will have a good family planning. It will save a lot. Thank you.
I think one word I have not really heard or read in the book, and I think this is very important also to discuss reproductive health, is infertility. Infertility is a major issue in this topic of reproductive health. And you may know not only that up to an average more than 10% of couples are affected from infertility, but also the following disorders which are actually coming from infertility are very, very high and certainly highly underestimated. And the WHO has actually ranked infertility plus all the diseases which are following from that tragedy as number 5 in the ranking of diseases. So I think infertility is really something I would love to discuss and would love to have implemented into your ideas when you during the program. And I would love if I come back maybe next year, that would be part of your discussion as well. Thank you very much.
Dr. Yasmin from Pakistan, secretary by the Packard Foundation. Thanks to all the presenters. I just have a question with Candice because she was talking about building a movement about long-acting universal contraceptive and how this can be a method that can be offered to young and adults and people. I really want to understand the kind of, this is not something you can answer now, but kind of the strategic talking points that you are sharing with the governments to change their policies. Because I know in Pakistan this could be a very big barrier because, and it is with the service providers. If these pre-service kind of curriculum revisions, we want to really train them that they are able to provide the long-acting reversible contraceptive information to the young people and adolescents that needs a whole range of activities. So I would be interested to know from Pathfinder and from Henry how this is being done because that really needs some very focused targeted work. Thank you.
Yeah, Candice. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Rahul from House Ministry, Indonesian Health Ministry. I want to ask you about there is a barrier like taboo when we speak about sexuality in our country. What should we do to tackle the problems? The first question. The second question is sexuality, reproduction, and health and rights is the most important factor. We tackle, we tell, and we do the seminar, conference like this, but implement what the biggest challenge for us, how to implement in the concrete action. What should in Asia Pacific region, there is based on data. There is many violences. So, what should we do to give the proper implementation for sexuality and reproduction, health and rights? Thank you for the chance. Good afternoon.
I think that what I try to do is, one is I provide a human story. I remember that when there was another Bali before the family planning conference, it was the Global Youth Conference, which was held in Bali in 2012. And there you had the Indonesian Foreign Ministry had brought a lot of people to that conference. And a lot of people actually asked me, because they looked at me and said, hey, this lady looks like, you know, an Asian. And they asked me, how comfortable am I with LGBTIQ issues? So I just said, look, in our societies, we have always accepted LGBTIQ people. We have had matnyas in our society, we have given rules to transgender. We have never had them, they were part of our culture, they were part of the community, they had their functions. We had no forms of violence against LGBTIQ community, right? And I just said, maybe as a parent, my greatest desire is to see that my children, you know, get married, have children, and I can play with my grandchildren or whatever. But if their identity is something different, I don't want them to do those things and become unhappy. And I really feel that when you talk like that, even the most hardened people, they understand what they're saying because you're lodging it in their heart. And they all know somebody in their family circle which is like that. So it's like, how do we create a kinder society? You know, and people will actually listen to that. So I think one is to humanize the sexuality thing. The second thing I try to remind is, as I said, that these issues and these communities have always been part of our culture. That for me, acceptance of this diversity is actually our culture. This intolerance that we are finding in our society against LGBTIQ communities is what I feel is an alien invasion. So it's not the LGBTIQ agenda which is alien, this is new rising intolerance which is alien to our culture. So, and I think that that's how we move it, you know, because other than that, it's very, you know, if we start just taking polar opposites, we're not going to be able to move the dialogue. We cannot actually agree on recommendations or steps ahead, or what actions we can take in the future together. So that's what I have been trying to use. I'm not saying that it's all the things that you can use, but that's what's worked for me.
Thank you. And I think the other important question was about how do you carry some of the ideas and recommendations from this conference forward back in your countries. And I think Wynn talked about different countries here in Asia Pacific that committed to the FP 2020 movement, and also the Sustainable Development Goals are just starting to be planned, and there will be national plans, health plans that would be created to track some of the indicators for the SDGs. So I think those are entry points where we have to make sure SRHR is reflected every step of the way. So many of the global advocates are now also working to insert good indicators into the SDG framework, and that's been a very difficult, long process, which isn't over yet. But at the country level, you can also advocate to your governments to collect the right data that could give you the information about whether there are quality of care services available, who's being left out, who is being served. Because a lot of the data that's collected may not be disaggregated, for example, by age or by level of income. And you can advocate to your governments to say, we don't really see how this data can be used if you don't know by different age group, for example, how the services are reaching. So I think every step of the way, we still have to advocate after this conference and beyond on better data collection as well as governments meeting their commitments. So, Elizabeth, do you have a question?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to all the presenters for the progressive perspectives that's been forwarded. I am Isabel Shop, and I'm from the Philippines, and we've been part of the 70 long years struggle to pass the reproductive health law, which is, now we're trying to be part of in terms of implementation. But I just want to note that while the law actually, our work is directly in the communities with both women and young people. And yes, we've been successful in having the law approved. And in some respects, this law provides us with the opportunity to work with government and to work with other stakeholders in really the fulfillment of rights. But one thing that should be noted, I think, is that there are instances when we speak of reproductive health and rights, there is much more focus on the health aspect, especially on family planning. I'm not saying it's not important, it is very important, but the other very important thing is the rights aspect, because we've always believed that for as long as the women don't know the law, they will not be able to use it. The second point is that in terms of young people, the law has actually created for us problems because of the restrictions that's been placed by the law itself. For instance, only young people, if we speak of minors, and that means below 18, they can only have access to family planning services, to contraception, if they have the permission, if they have the consent of their parents and guardians. And this is a problem for us. This is a problem in terms of really trying to help the young people have sovereignty over their own bodies. And I am happy that I heard about the FP 2020 now, because when we go back home, we would surely one day participate in the process of putting together a country plan, because the Philippines is in a very important phase now in terms of trying to achieve both health and rights for both people, for both women and young women in communities.
Hello, I am Dr. Ajogan from Lima. Firstly, I would like to congratulate one of the speakers and my professor who invited me to attend this. Professor Tony would give me a chance to attend this conference. I would like to ask you, all of you, about two questions. Firstly, should we give the comprehensive health education to all of the youth debate, whether they have the same age or different age or same sex or different sex? This is the one question. And another question is, you have already said that WPI should do the comprehensive approach. So, how should we do the comprehensive approach to the young people?
Yeah, could you maybe you could ask it again? Sorry.
Can I give the comprehensive education? One is comprehensive health education should be kids with the same age or same sex or this is one question. Another question was comprehensive approach to the young people. So how should we do the comprehensive approach to education?
So I think we've got the two questions. One, does comprehensive sexuality education need to be age appropriate? And the answer is yes. There's wonderful curriculum guides out there to make sure that sexuality education is age appropriate. The other question is about whether practices should be separate or not, and there's evidence both ways. So there's programs that work very successfully with girls and boys together, and there's programs that divide girls and boys that also work very well. So it depends on the curriculum and most of all, the majority.
Yeah, one of the great things about this conference, and also I hope through this lunch symposium, you now recognize our distinguished speakers here. You know what their expertise is, and so you can certainly talk to them after this session as well as throughout this week to ask more of your questions. I think a lot of you would like to get to the 2 o'clock session on time, so I think we will come to a close if there are no other burning questions. And I really wanted to first thank all of the speakers today and for the Data and Packard Foundation for sponsoring this great lunch symposium. I hope some of the takeaways from this would energize you and keep you thinking about whether some of the advocacy messages you have to come up with together, whether some of the opportunities for advocacy, who are the policymakers you need to reach for some of these messages. So I hope that you will continue those fruitful discussions throughout the week, and then we hope we will deliver also a statement to you at the end of the conference that hopefully will summarize a lot of these great points that have come up. So, and certainly we are taking the messages from this conference to the next 9th conference in Vietnam and continue our discussions there as well. So thank you very much all for coming to the lunch symposium, and I hope you have good sessions this afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I had one more announcement, which is that we have some USB flash drives